Welcome, sweet listeners. I am joined today by someone who's come through very intimate personal recommendation. Samora is a really extensive space holder, men's work facilitator. He's also a musician. He's a sound alchemist. He's kind of all of the things. And whenever I'm put into contact with someone who clearly holds quite profound space and who has a seemingly lifelong commitment to supporting the growth and the expansion of others, it's always on my agenda and my radar to bring them to your earbuds. And so the first thing, Samora, is just thank you so much for being here with us. I cannot wait for this conversation that we're going to have about all things masculinity, all things deep self-evolution, all things spirituality. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's an honor to be here. Yeah, thank you for inviting me on the show. Yeah, it's a real honor to talk about my work and to open up this space with you, one of intrigue and excitement and exploration.
So what I think we might do, just to get the listeners really cozy and nestled in, is give us a sense, if you were describing your work in your own words, in a nutshell, how would you describe what it is that you feel called in the world to do?
I think essentially it's creating safe spaces or sacred environments. I feel like culturally, especially in the West, we've moved away from a more religious landscape for, I think, many reasons. And I think many people have moved towards more materialistic longing or searching. And sometimes that doesn't really feel a deeper connection to ourselves and fulfilling a deeper connection to the infinite, to God, to creation, whatever you want to term it as. And I feel that I've lived a life where I've really pursued that connection to myself first and foremost, and then through my own exploration have been gifted an ability to create environments where people feel safe to explore themselves. And so I would say that I create and facilitate sacred spaces for people to connect deeply with who they are.
And so it sounds like from what you're saying, there's this deep, intimate association between getting to know thyself and also connecting to something potentially that's greater, that's more encompassing, encircling, that has an existence that's both connective to, but also separate from us. Is that, am I reading you accurately?
Definitely, definitely. I feel that the connection to self is also a connection to the universe. I feel there's a parallel between the inner world, the inner space, and what we perceive outside of ourselves. And the closer that we can get to ourselves, beyond conditioning, beyond things that we've been conditioned by from our family, society, and from our own mental lens, the more we can realize our greater self, more expansive states of consciousness and sense of self-identity.
And so, in that sense, when you're in sacred space, or when you cultivate a sacred space, whether that's in a cathedral, which I know is one of your regular venues, whether that's in the woodlands, whether that's on an overseas retreat, part of your intention, presumably, is to allow people to get quiet enough that they can go inward and listen and then feel for what is that deeper soul voice, but also what is that deeper soul purpose that is me utilizing the talents and the particular channel that I've been offered by a greater wisdom, by a greater universe, and then having the grounding and the rooting to be able to articulate and enact that in the world.
Definitely. Yeah, I think grounding is really important because when you do some of the work that I do is I think sometimes because it's exploring the unknown, that can almost be a bit destabilizing because when you're challenging frameworks and belief systems and traumas and things that come up through the connection to sacred space and the exploration of self, yeah, there's a sense of instability that can arise. So I think that me being grounded in truth, in my own sense of exploration myself, I can give people that sense of comfort and ease in the unknown and in the discomfort of self exploration.
Why is it, Samora, that you feel that we've lost the either the innate capacity or the motivation and the prescription to do inner work like this automatically? I mean, I think it's fantastic. And, I'm in this world as well. I think it's phenomenal that we are now in ritualistic and wellness practice to get people immersed in sacred ceremonial self-developmental space. But there's almost something quite interesting for me about the fact that we've had to leave our everyday existence to go on a Vipassana, to go on a men's work retreat, to go and dive into a deep psychotherapeutic training in order to be able to come essentially back home. I mean, I've heard you talking about appropriation. I've heard you talking about kind of cultures where spirituality is so deeply immersed that it's just part of the weave of a human life. What's your sense of how we've gotten here to this place where remedially we're doing an amazing amount as space holders, but it's not automatic in people's lives?
Yeah, I think it's again the relationship to religion and relation and also the emergence of our relationship to materialism and those two becoming quite like separate. So I think people challenge religion, I think quite rightly so, because it often creates constraints and limitations, and often it's a relationship to someone else, someone who's maybe an intermediary between the individual and the infinite source. And I think that people have challenged that for quite some time, but then have maybe lost connection to spirituality in terms of culture. If you look at different cultures, like if you go to South America and they have the medicine, the practice with ayahuasca, for example, that lineage and that culture is unbroken. It stretches back for a long, long time. Whereas I feel like this culture, there's a disconnect from ancestry, and so I think what has replaced that is material development, which has its benefits in many ways, but then over time I feel like there's kind of like a pressure on family systems and structures. So we don't have the extended family unit anymore, and the sense of community, this close sense of community that's close around us. So we've become more individualized, and from that we create this sense of, I feel, a sense of creativity and beauty, because we're all searching for this uniqueness from that individuality. But then what we lose is we lose this connection spiritually, and this connection to a wider sense of community and purpose that comes with that. Because I feel when you connect to others in that sense of Ubuntu, which is a South African saying, I am because you are, then you do feel a sense of comfort, and that we are in this together. And I feel that there's, in the modern world, there's a sense of loneliness, there's a sense of like isolation, because we don't have that feeling of family and community as much as we did in the past.
It's such a passion subject of mine. I mean, you're making me think of so many things. The first is the difference between knowledge and knowing. I'm aware that as we record this, we're in a society where information has never been more profligate and diverse and accessible, so rapid. In that sense, intelligence or the acquisition of knowledge has become exactly the same as the way that we've pursued materialism, as you describe it. But that what that does, because the information is so vast and it's so available and it's so transient and it's so unintimate, is it takes us outside of ourselves to gain the information that we feel that we need in order to come back to a place of, I can make an assured decision. Whereas knowing, a knowingness, I was listening to an Osho meditation this morning because, as interesting or controversial of a character as he is, he formed part of one of the beautiful experiences that I went to earlier this year, and he was talking about this thing of listening in for the inner knowing, and the idea that we really can't find that quality of safety through increased intake from the outside world. And I think that that really touches on what you're describing as far as community connection purpose, that we have become so isolated as a society and yet so numerous that we just live in this huge irony. People everywhere. We could, if we chose to, interweave with them so much more deeply, and yet we don't. And I wonder, I suppose I spend a lot of my time wondering why that is, as someone who's very open and warm and would love another person to feel welcome in my presence. I'm faced every day by the reality that most people feel scared and hesitant and guarded and protective of their interiority when they're coming skin to skin with another human being. What's your take on all of that slight, get me on a soapbox moment?
No, I love that. I really resonate with what you said there about, I often contemplate the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I think that we live in an information age where we're bombarded and oversaturated and overwhelmed with information. And this information is at our fingertips. And now we have AI, which is, you know, enhancing that. So I feel like, yeah, the difference for me is application. And I have an analogy for that. I feel I've gone through my own metamorphosis, and I like to create analogies or metaphors. And for me, it's like the butterfly. So for me, the egg represents the unknowing, or just a sense of ignorance, maybe, of your own potential. And the caterpillar represents the emergence from that into a state of knowledge, of information, of like, you're yearning for answers to these great questions you might have. And then there comes the chrysalis phase, which is, for me, is a very important phase about turning inward to contemplate the information that you've been exposed to then transform that from your own perspective, which is wisdom, which is the application of that knowledge. And then you can emerge like a butterfly to transcend your own limitations. And so I feel that that is a process. And if you're just stuck at the caterpillar phase and you don't have the awareness to go within and to crystallize that information, then yeah, you're almost lost in that sea of information. So I think for me, it's going through that process myself. That's part of my facilitation, is to make people aware that you have this whole wealth of knowledge within you already, and it's just about learning how to access that.
The word that we would use in both therapeutic contexts and in the body would be integration.
Yes.
I mean, a very simple way of describing it would be digestion. What are we actually doing with the material that we're taking in? How does it become part of our cellular makeup?
Yes, exactly. And is it a value? Like, my process recently has become more about, less is more, and trying to spend time away from the phone, away from too much stimulation, so I can actually create space and simplicity. Because Leonardo da Vinci said the simplicity is the greatest sophistication. And I really love that, because it shows you that once you start to relax into yourself and simplify your life, you realize that things come to you, that there's this sense of effortlessness that comes along with that type of living and that type of mindset. And I feel like we live in a culture of really striving, of, trying to prove ourselves and adding on to ourselves. So I feel like this process that I describe is about integration and slowing down.
When we get quiet, this is building on what you've said. When we get quiet, in my experience, two things happen. One is a little bit like you're saying about moving away from your phone. You have this capacity to hear the true level of volume of things. I came back from a Vipassana earlier this year, and obviously, as part of that, handed my phone in and was completely away from work for 10 days, which had been unfathomable and unheard of for the 2 or 3 years previously. And I remember when I came back into London, the feeling of the cacophony, not just of noise, but on demand on my attention and my time, and the feeling that I wasn't consenting to any of it. You know, I'd been in a space where, by and large, I got to choose everything that I did. And so there was that quality of discernment, which is what you're describing. So we both, our eardrums and our taste buds, like when you take out sugar, they sort of reacclimatize themselves. But the other thing, of course, is that when you get into the simplicity, you are aware both of the incredible nuance within the simplicity, but also, like your analogy, the Vitruvian man, we're then aware of the capacity for refinement. Like things can actually get more beautiful, more perfect, the more we allow ourselves to come into the simple and into the still. And if I think about what you're describing more largely, and I think this is a really key point for the listeners, all of you gorgeous people that are back home that are using this as your moment of nourishment, it's the it's the reminder that when we're chasing, we're only ever chasing from a beautiful amalgam blend of fear and want. And both of them are based in lack. And none of them, therefore, are really based in presence or in stability. And just in being with you, Samora, I feel as though that stability is probably something that through your caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly experience, you've been able to hone and craft, both in yourself as a human, in yourself as a partner, in yourself, I think, as a father, if I'm right.
Yes, yeah. My son will be a year in January, a year old in January. So, and I think as you were speaking, reflecting on my own experience becoming a father, that's a rebirth. That's yeah, a whole new way of seeing life from this perspective of newness, of looking at my son, looking at the world from these new eyes. It creates this whole sense of feeling of I'm not just going to teach him things, because I feel like as parents, you sort of naturally assume that I'm going to be guiding you and teaching you, which in some ways I am, but I think that more of a custodian and also an exchange as well. That this beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran on children, he says, your children don't come from you, they come through you. And it's your role to give them your love, not your thoughts. And I really love that idea that we learn from them, and they, in a way, he's going to be my greatest teacher. And I think it really adds to that sense of liberation of seeing, of presence, because he's literally seeing everything for the first time, and it brings you back to that childlike state of wonder that everything is new in every moment.
Yeah, it's wonder. It's also the confidence and the faith of youth. You know, if you're surrounded by someone's love and not their thoughts, I would argue that that's core to facilitation, actually. Not the kind of codependent love that we are used to seeing in society. I think we've got two kinds that we've kind of made popular. Codependent love, where there really is no suitable boundary between my wholeness and your wholeness. And so it builds resentment and it builds retaliation and it kind of regresses us in all of the wonderful ways that all of us fall prey to. But then also pedestalized romantic love. And it's like we're only really operating with the two modalities, whereas deep love that is also the compassion, is also empathy, is also the, did you say it was Ubuntu? Is that the word that you use?
Yes, I am because you are.
I am because you are. So love that embraces that, that's a very, very different environment to bring up a child in. It's a very different environment to bring up a client in to bring up a retreat space in and to seed into society. And for me, it feels like what that would create is the beauty of reparenting without the danger of pedestalization or guruism.
Yes, yes, completely. I think there's also a balance between, I feel, structure, and maybe you could say discipline, and freedom to be oneself and to explore your own creativity and your own individuality. And I think that, yeah, sometimes we have this pressure, through education and through maybe expectation on children to create this, I guess, projection of what we want for them. But for my understanding, my growing understanding, becoming a parent is, yeah, like I said, it's that custodian, that sort of stewardship of creating safety for them to be who they are. And I think that's a challenge because I have to challenge my own conditioning and how I was brought up and how I was educated, and have to be continually checking myself in, yeah, my own way of being open and receptive, and to create that space for him to be his own individual.
Do you think, my love, it would have been different as an experience for you? I mean, I know that with each child it's different. So, in some ways, I don't want to make this gendered. And in another way, I want to recognize that there's a difference generally in a father relating to a daughter than a father relating to a son. I'm going to put a question mark on that because as a non-parent, I can't speak to that. And also as someone that is very gender fluid, I also don't really want to make that too black and white. But I wonder if you think it would have been a different evolution for you, especially given that you in some ways specialize in evolving masculinity. Do you think it would have been different if your firstborn had been a wee gal?
Yes, definitely. Yes. I feel the challenges and the experiences are different. And one thing that I've come across recently in terms of boys and girls, in terms of their development, and I think that that's something that's really powerful. One thing is initiation, the way that different cultures and tribes would initiate young girls and initiate young boys are different. And I think the difference is the difference between physiology and psychology. So, for example, a young boy, he would go through puberty, but that would be his main transformation. Whereas women have their menstruation cycle, then they can become mothers, and then they go through the menopause. And so these are huge physiological changes. Whereas young boys, their changes are more psychological. So that's why, and I've been doing a lot of research on this recently about tribal initiation. Often in tribes, there would be some sort of challenge, and sometimes it'd be quite a painful challenge. For example, in South America, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they would do this ritual where they would get these bullet ants. Their sting is 10 times more painful than a wasp. They would put their hands in these gloves for around 10 minutes, and it would be excruciatingly painful. From our perspective, that's quite a harsh initiation. But from their perspective, there needs to be this break or this transformation in the boy's psychology where he recognizes, okay, now I've gone through this pain as a process, and now I'm understanding what it means to be a man. And what is missing, I feel, in our culture, especially for young men, is that initiation, is that we don't have these rites of passage. And I think I feel that there's a loneliness epidemic, and there's also an epidemic in, I would say, a lack of eldership for men. Because another difference between men and women is that men need mirrors. We need elders or men who are more experienced and more mature than us to show us how to show up, how to carry ourselves as men. And so my my own process of initiation, of connecting with my masculinity, has given me this insight into giving my son this guidance and understanding the landscape of masculinity and how we have. There's this really beautiful quote in this book called Iron John, and it said, "The love unit that's been most damaged is the father-son bond from the Industrial Revolution." And so there's this disconnect from the father culturally, and a lot of the men that I work with, I would say 99% of the men have estranged, emotionally disconnected, physically disconnected from their fathers. And so this awareness and this work has given me, yes, such deep insight into how I father and how I connect to my own son, and also to my own inner child, because I've realized my connection to my own inner child creates the ability to love my son, and also the ability to heal the wounds that have been passed down through from my father and his father.
It's so fascinating to hear you because obviously my terrain generally, I'd say 70% of my people are women, just in terms of those that I spend the most consistent time supporting. And about 30, maybe a tiny bit more, 35, 40, is men. And of course, when I'm in that role with them, so much of what we're doing is teaching them self intimacy, teaching them how to access their emotionality, essentially recategorizing what their interiority is and how they can come close to it. And if I think about some of what they share with me, the stories of their lives and the stories of their romantic relationships, brotherhood seems to be something that we still have a connection to, that is maintained, especially like some of the men that I work with, their tribal brotherhood is so core. And a lot of those brotherly bonds are people that they've known for a couple of decades. They're people that were geographically close to them when they were kids. There's a really tribal feeling to it. They box with them. Like they're the sort of people that would come en masse to your experiences. But think about the relationship father to son, as you say, it's as though there's been a disconnection, which is what you're describing. And in the face and the space of the disconnection, the only dynamic that's been allowed to materialize is one of distanced power. And so, of course, you just then end up with this competitive thing of a child not feeling quite loved and stewarded by their father, but also feeling as though the father is the hierarchy, but it's not a hierarchy that they're able to attain because the hierarchy is based, first of all, on the family unit, but also now often on how much money or how much empire has that father created. And even if I think about my own father, he amassed, a really incredible empire pre-divorce. But actually, if I think about how vocal was he with me about how to manage money, how to steward money, how to build, not. So there was not the sharing that you're describing we need from, as the masculine, we need from the elder masculine within our tribe. And so I think there's so much in what you're sharing that's absolutely true. And I suppose it makes me wonder, in your spaces, you must therefore be toggling with your men between father, brother, father, brother. Do you find yourself going into those two different roles?
Yes, definitely. I think that the father is an archetype, and this is something that's become very apparent in the work that I do. Is that the father is the initial connection to masculinity that the son has, and if the father is absent emotionally or physically, then what then does the son model himself upon? So there's often a sense of yearning or longing or a sense of having to prove oneself. If the father has been maybe a tyrant or has been maybe weak in some ways, he hasn't been empowered himself, then the son takes on that sense of maybe tyrannical energy or that sense of I'm not good enough. So the father archetype is very important. And if we don't resolve and heal and reconnect to the father archetype within our own psyche as men, we can go through our whole lives without feeling complete and whole and capable.
If I was to be a bit challenging and ask you, this is such a huge generalization, so you're allowed to bat off the question completely. But if I was to ask you, what are the core aspects in your experience of the masculine experience that we don't lean into culturally? I'm thinking, I know that the two things that my men most often struggle with are embracing their strength because they're afraid that their strength means violence, and embracing love because on some level love has come to be associated with vulnerability, weakness. So those are two that I can think of within a quote unquote masculine experience. You have far more experience with this than me. What would you define as the core tenets of masculine embrace that you support people with, or that you think are missing in the way that children are brought up?
Yeah, I think the two aspects that I feel men really need is initiation, is the rite of passage. Because if we don't have that sense of being challenged as a boy, then what we get is what I call the Peter Pan syndrome, or this sense of, they call it the puritanus. That's kind of like the psychological term for it. Whereas what happens is a man doesn't evolve. He grows as a man physically, but psychologically, he stays like a boy. And so initiation is a really important part of masculine development and growth. And the other part is what I said is around connection to the father, but not just the father in terms of his own father, but father energy, or maybe the king archetype, which is a man who's embodied in his own masculinity, but not from a place of dominance, but from a place of inner knowing and inner strength. And that's something we don't really see that much today, because a lot of men they strive to be powerful and sometimes to dominate others. But that, for me, that's not true strength. That often relates to the shadow of the king, which is the tyrant. And so, what I would say is that it's really important that we, as men, sit with each other in circle to clarify what authentic embodied masculinity looks like. Because if we haven't seen it, and all we have is these images of the tyrant within our culture, within politics, within religion, so many different institutions, then we don't have examples of healthy masculinity. And so, as I said before, we need mirrors. Men need to mirror each other. And if we don't have a polished mirror, then we can't see ourselves clearly. And so we act out of the shadow.
Yeah, you can't come into celebration or wholeness in that sense. You can't reprise that title. I am sitting here aware that you're a husband, and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how an embrace of, I mean, healthy masculinity is such one of those phrases that we now use, but I wonder how a healthy embrace of masculinity changes romance, partnership, sexuality, how it impacts the female if you're in a male to female relationship, or the feminine more generally. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful question, and something that I really sit with, and something that comes up obviously in my relationship. I really I came across this, I guess, form of wisdom. Is called the Rosicrucian Mysteries, and it was the Rose and the Cross, and it's like a mystery school, and essentially it's about how the feminine, and it doesn't really matter if you're a man or woman or you're in the same sex relationship. The essence of it is about femininity and masculinity, and firstly creating balance within yourself, within those poles, and then in relationship to each other. And so in this wisdom, the feminine is expressed as the rose and the masculine is expressed as the cross. And so when a man is in his fullness, the feminine begins to unfurl and to blossom because she feels a sense of safety, because she realizes that he wants to guard and protect her femininity, not to try to steal it or to try to impose his will upon it. And so there's a beautiful dance between the masculine and the feminine in the sense that the masculine begins to become a guardian and to praise and to celebrate her femininity. And in that sense of safety and celebration, she starts to unfurl the petals to blossom and bloom. I see that and continue to nurture that in my relationship, and it's really beautiful to witness.
And I guess in what you're saying, that we still get to maintain equality, because that would be the first thing that people would wonder about some of those old-fashioned archetypes is if the man's role is to be the protector, the guard for the softness of the woman to unfurl, there'll be people listening that are thinking, yeah, but what about the sexuality of me as a woman? What about the rage of me as a woman? What about my capacity to be equally entitled in this relationship? Is that still made space for within this dynamic? I'm assuming, sitting with you, that yes, there is still space, but it's about allowing a full spectrum in some ways.
Yeah, for me, the word balance rings truer than equality, because I feel that in the work that I do, and with men and with women, I realize that there are differences. And I think that once those differences are honored and respected, a balance can unfold. And the balance is about acknowledging those differences and celebrating them to the point where I feel that there is a natural balance and sense of respect that form. And you mentioned feminine rage, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing to bring in, because I feel from this sort of maybe hyper masculine or patriarchal sort of society that feminine rage is something that men are sometimes fearful of, and sometimes they want to repress, or don't know how to handle, deal with. But for me, I feel that that's a really welcomed part of the feminine, because I realize that femininity is not just about softness. I mean, look at the example of the rose. It has thorns. It's not just a flower. It also knows how to protect itself. So in that sense of protection, it's not just I'm going to protect. It's like an invitation. It's a celebration and a welcoming of all aspects of the feminine, not just the ones that feel safe. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And to your credit, as folk, I would say that part of the problem is that we have, as women, if I speak for my gender, through a myriad of different factors, we've been cultivated and socialized to misexpress our rage. It comes out in passive aggression, it comes out in secrecy, it comes out in retaliation. It very rarely, unless you are, for example, Italian born, comes out in actual rage. There's something so brilliantly direct about the stereotypical way that men express anger. It's clean, it's clear. And I don't think it was until I was 36, which is 2 years ago, that I started actually speaking my rage and physically expressing my rage when it arose or when it was appropriate to do that. And so I think often in relationship, whether you're in a man to female relationship or whether you're in a same sex relationship or whether you're somewhere in the milieu, so much of actually what's going wrong is that people are just not being honest. They're not taking ownership for their feelings, and they're not then expressing them in appropriate ways for the other person to really understand, what do I do with this? There's just a lot of misfiring. And I also slightly think that about men's relationship with their own strength. I mean, you were talking about initiation, and that's clearly really important in your work, this coming of age and this coming into a different period of your life that gives you different permissions. And there's a commitment in what you're describing when those men in the tribe were putting their hands into bee stings, that's a committed movement into a different decade of your life or a different series of decades into your life. And so commitment is one of the things that culturally we have really shied away from. There is nothing really that you can't extrapolate away from or change your mind about. So nothing is really a commitment in terms of what's written on paper. Um, but also, my suspicion is that we've replaced initiation and we've replaced physicality of challenge with workaholism, with more emails, with ways of attaining power. There's very little of what you're describing, except when you go and do it in a context like you hold, or when you go and do plant medicine.
Yes, indeed. And to add to what you just said, part of the initiation is that you don't know if you're going to pass the challenge. There's a sense of uncertainty, and I think that that presents this beautiful quality to the challenge in that you there is uncertainty, there is the unknown, and I feel like we live in a culture where we are afraid of the unknown, and we're so controlled and we're so sort of structured in managing our venture into the unknown. And so that form of initiation again is so important because it creates this instability, this uncertainty on purpose. So you are challenged deeply. And I feel without challenge, we can't get into the core of who we are. We can't get into the bones. And I feel that myself and the work that I do, I create challenge again in a healthy environment, because if you could be held in that, if you can be supported, but you can feel the discomfort of challenge, that is where true growth emerges.
I mean, it's impossible to have growth without a degree of it, I think. So you're completely correct. I also think there's so much in that, isn't there? The deliberate challenge allows you to feel safe in the unknown. Deliberate challenge allows you to feel much more neutral when inadvertent, unplanned challenge comes your way. Deliberate challenge also points out your vulnerabilities, your fractures, the areas that you need to evolve. And it allows you to develop healthful pride in your innate capacity rather than in your material gatherings or your external title or how much this person likes you. I mean, God, if I think even about the difference between me going to the gym and doing an extra 10 kilos on my weight set versus me getting another 5 followers on Instagram, the feeling of achievement, the sense of swagger as I crippled walk down the street, it's different. It's different, and yet we spend so much more time trying to get the intractable, which won't give us what we need, rather than facing the material possible challenge, which will give us what we need over time.
Yeah, which leads us to this, I think, relationship with our minds and our bodies, and this disconnect that many of us have is that we've become very heady. And there's this Chinese proverb that says, "The man who's top heavy falls over." And I feel that that relates to like this sense of, yeah, not being fully embodied and being in the mind and thinking that we know a thing without actually going through the challenge of actually feeling it on every set in every cell of our body to embody that knowledge. Again, coming back to what we were saying earlier, you know.
Yeah, which again for me, the word that comes up is intimacy and integration. The two eyes within embodiment. I have I have a question just in relation to this thing about the unknown. If I was to put you on the spot and I was to ask you, why is it, do you think, that we are so afraid of being in the unknown? What is it underneath the unknown that makes us so tentative as modern humans? Why is it so destabilizing?
I think it's control, and I think it's this perception of feeling safe or secure. And I think it's more about leaving the safety of the known rather than embracing the unknown. Because if we know something or we feel that we know something, and often I'm sure you experience that, once we know something, we feel it and we connect with that thing, that we feel safe in that, that something else that comes along represents something new, and it can threaten our attachment to the known. And so I feel that culturally we are in this kind of safe space often of what we know. And I think that with plant medicines and embracing discomfort, we can really challenge that and challenge our limitations to actually see that that known really just keeps us enclosed in a space of of limitation, essentially.
And if I was to ask you about the aspect of the unknown that I would say most people are the most paralyzed by, which is the fear of what other people think of them, what would be your answer to anyone that's listening that's going through that particular anticipation and spend most of their time worrying about what is it this person thinks? What is it that this person's going to do on the basis of what they think of me when I do this thing? What would you say?
I would say that it's important to contemplate regularly the greatest unknown, which is death, because that is going to happen to us all. And if we actually invite that in, not to be something that we push aside and, to sort of never consider. For me personally, it's been such a great liberator, because once we sit with that and visualize it and be with it, then it doesn't become as scary, and we can take more risks with our lives.
And Samora, as you record this, what age are you just now?
I'm 41.
You're 41. Okay, so we're almost peers age-wise. And would you say, as you look at the life that you've lived so far, if we were thinking about deathbed regrets or deathbed pride and purpose, do you feel contented with what you've created so far?
I feel now that I've challenged a lot of my limitations, and on a regular basis, I really meet my edge and created a healthy relationship with death. I feel that, yes, I'm content with who I am. I feel I have a deeper sense of self-knowledge, self-knowing, to the point where if I did die tomorrow, that I would die with this awareness of being able to dive deeper into myself beyond even my own former perceptions of who I am, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does. There are so many other questions that I feel that I have for you, and it might be that we want to take this into a recording part two. But I suppose it would be really unfair. It would do such an injustice to your work if I didn't ask us to just hone in on a little bit of what you're offering as far as ways that people can connect with you or can dive into this work, because it's very clear from what you're describing why you do what you do and what the orientation of your men's experiences are, what they're designed to create in the masculine. Would you be up for giving us just a little bit more flesh on the bones of that in terms of materially, how can people get involved in what you do?
Yeah, so I do coaching one to one, which gives men the opportunity to really dive deep into themselves, and it's like a hero's journey, going through these steps of the ordeal of facing the dragon, and it's kind of like a mythological journey into themselves. That's why I offer it in terms of my coaching, and I'm really excited to be growing and creating a new offering, which is called Pillar. And Pillar is going to be, so I'm writing a book about the fundamentals of creating and growing and embodying what I term as healthy masculinity. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Cameron, who will probably listen to this, he is a software engineer, and he's got a very successful app already called Trackstack, which he's working with DJs. And now he's building, alongside my book, an app that men can use all over the world to connect, to build, and to pour into this growing awareness and knowledge of these core principles that I've filtered down and crystallized in this body of work called Pillar. The initial launch of the online circles is going to be on the 28th of December. And then we're going to be hosting them monthly. And then next year, we're going to be doing some deeper, immersive men's retreats, some wild camping retreats, and some in-person men's circles as well. So this app gives men the opportunity as well, worldwide, to create circles within their own locality. So it's going to be, digital internet connection, but also a personal, embodied connection, giving men the knowledge to create circles in their own locality.
I saw all of that gorgeous empowerment piece that, as coaches, you and I are so committed to. I'm also having this lovely image of eventually my women and your men coming together in their respective circles once they've done their respective healing, which I think could be so
beautiful. That would be amazing. I think that I've definitely had a vision for that, and I feel that that will definitely come into fruition in the near future, that men and women need to sit together, because I think women-only spaces are really important, men's-only spaces are really important, but also that coming together and exchanging of respect and knowledge, I think that really needs to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the dialogue, the direct dialogue of, this is what I need you to understand about what goes on inside of me. I mean, that's the nature. I do a lot of relationship coaching. That's also the nature of just a conversation within a relationship that's well held. This was my experience. This is yours. Let me try and see through your lens. But I think a certain amount of self-possession is needed, and a certain amount of healing is needed for those conversations to be really fruitful. Sweet thing, I'm aware of your beautiful schedule and your overseas geography right now, and so I'm going to liberate you to the rest of your evening. But thank you so much for joining me. It's been so lovely to connect with you. And I'm just such a celebrator of the work that you do, because I can hear how committed you are to it and how meaningful it is for the people whose lives you touch.
Oh, Anthea, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure, absolutely. And yeah, love talking and diving deep. And I feel like we could probably go on for hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's pencil in the next one soon. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, sending you so much love and gratitude.
Yeah, you too. All right, my sweet listeners, we adore you. You know that we're going to put in the show notes all of the ways that you can connect with Samora and all the ways that you can connect with us. So reach out, don't be shy. This is all for you. And if there are additional speakers that you want to hear or conversations that really are burning in your hearts, please let us know. All right, my friends, we'll catch you for another episode soon. Much love.